Now back to Michael Dukes on KBYR.
Yep, that's called the Keithley Jig, written specifically for my friend and oft commentator here on the program, Brad Keithley, who is with Alaskans for Sustainable Budget, formerly an oil and gas consultant, attorney, now retired, and trying to fight and find a way for us to create a budget that is truly sustainable. I mean, that we can live within our means, which I don't think is really too much to ask. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like the politicians are agreeing with us at all on that. Brad Keithley joins us this morning. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Michael. How are you doing today?
You know, I know it's politics, and I know it shouldn't surprise me, but sometimes I'm so surprised at kind of the cynicism that people, the power games that people play with people's lives. That's what bothers me when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I've been listening to you this morning. You've been on a tear.
I can't see, again, I'm a libertarian, so I believe in the absolute smallest government possible. But the two things that I think that any, rational and reasonable society should support is we should find ways to take care of the elderly, the indigent, and the disabled. I think that that's what we should be doing. And now we're going to take a crack at the Pioneer Home. Again, one of only 5 Pioneer homes in the state, the only one that deals with veterans, and we're talking about $6 million out of $1 billion. That's $6 on 1,000. If I can't find $6 worth of savings to spread out over $1,000 worth of spending, I've got deeper problems.
Well, we do have deep problems in this state, and that's one of them. I mean, threats like that certainly aren't going to make this situation any better. They aren't going to bring people together. They aren't going to find a common sense solution or a common solution. They're just going to, irritate people even more and push them farther apart. If that's the game the governor wants to play, I suppose, he can play whatever game he wants, but that's not going to produce an outcome that's in this state's best interest. So it's hugely irritating. I agree.
Yeah, it's just frustrating, this whole thing. Let's talk a little bit about what went down here yesterday in the House. Of course, you and I have had lots of discussions about the majority and some of the stuff that they've put together. But surprisingly, you were actually in favor, in part, of what they did yesterday with HB 111, which is the new oil, gas tax and tax credit bill that came out. It's a combined bill that deals with both issues. And you say what on HB 111?
Well, HB 111 is the oil tax bill, and let me be clear at the outset, it's bad oil tax policy. It does one good thing, which is finally stop these cash credits, payments in cash out of the state treasury to certain producers that you and I have talked about a lot on the show. It does that good thing. Most of the rest of what it does is horrible oil tax policy. But here was the choice yesterday. Here was the choice in the House yesterday. HB 111 was up on the floor. It's the only oil tax bill, the only bill that puts the oil industry in the game that's been proposed in the legislature this session. The Senate keeps talking a good game about canceling the cash oil credits,
right?
But they haven't produced a bill, and they haven't done any committee process that does that. So they're talking a good game, but they haven't done anything. This is the only bill over on the House side that does that. Plus, it is the only bill that keeps the oil industry in the game, keeps them involved in trying to find a solution to this. If HB 111 had been defeated yesterday on the House floor, there wouldn't have been any bill dealing with the cash oil credits, and the oil industry could have gone home and said, well, we don't have to pay any share of this, and so we're out of the game. We're not going to try to influence the outcome. And there are some trade groups that are aligned with the oil industry that are pushing the wrong solution. Keep Alaska Competitive, the Resource Development Council, the Alaska Chamber are all pushing a proposal that just relies entirely on PFD cuts alone in order to generate new revenue for government. In other words, they go immediately to the option that hurts the overall Alaska economy the worst, benefits their members, but hurts the overall Alaska economy the worst. And they would have been free if HB 111 had been defeated yesterday on the House floor. They would have been free just to keep pushing that agenda without any concern about any backup over on the oil tax side. So they wouldn't have had to compromise. They would have just kept pushing that agenda without any sort of recognition that they needed to compromise at the end. So in the context of yesterday, in the context of that vote yesterday, frankly, in my opinion, voting yes on HB 111 was the right thing to do because it keeps oil taxes on the table. It keeps the oil industry in the game. It has a bill now where we cancel the cashable oil tax credits, something the Senate talks about but hasn't done, and it keeps that issue alive and keeps the aligned groups with the oil industry, Keep Alaska Competitive, Resource Development Council, and the Alaska Chamber, keeps them in a situation where they need to compromise as opposed to pushing an agenda which tries to fund continued spending on the backs of middle and low income Alaskans. It was the right vote to take, and I particularly want to call out and congratulate Representative Dean Westlake from Kotzebue, from Northwest Alaska, in his vote. That was a tough vote that Dean had to make yesterday.
Right.
It against the oil industry, tough vote, but he made the right vote. People who and I also want to call out Jason Grin for going the wrong direction. I mean, if Jason's trying to get to a solution, voting with the industry yesterday was not the way to get to an overall solution. So I just want to say that Dean Westlake really made a very good vote yesterday, and I think it was the right vote.
And I want to point out to folks who maybe don't know or haven't heard Brad a lot or know, again, this is speaking as a guy who is, again, part of this industry for many, many years, and understanding that this oil tax credit system is really superfluous. I mean, it is unique in the world and is, really not needed, and in fact is costing Alaska a lot of money. I mean, we're on the hook right now for well over $1 billion for past credits, and as we continue to rack it up, this is something that's not going to help us. It's going to hurt us in the long run.
It is. What's in the best industry? The best interests of Alaska and the best interests of the industry is getting a stable fiscal system that works. That's what I've been saying since 2010 when we started this effort. It's what I said in 2012, 2014, and I continue to say today. We need to get a stable state fiscal system so we're not always looking to industry to fund gaps. And so people investors can rely on a stable fiscal system in Alaska. Taking the industry out of the game like HB 111, like voting no on HB 111 yesterday proposed to do, and continuing and not having a bill that dealt with these refundable oil credits is not going to create a stable fiscal system. It's going to continue to destabilize our the Alaska state fiscal system going forward.
Right.
And even if industry would escape this year without having to pay taxes, it just sets it up for an even worse situation a year or 2 years down the road. We need to get to a stable solution, and industry needs to be part of that solution, and not rely entirely on PFD cuts to develop that solution. So, again, HB 111, bad oil policy. It'll get modified in the Senate. We'll end up with something better. But yesterday, keeping that issue alive and keeping the oil industry as part of the game was a necessary step to take.
And let's take this back and tie it to what something else the House has done. The House has done is move forward a substitute of SB 26, which essentially ties everything back into this contingency on, one, the oil taxes, which the Senate has obviously been very reluctant and recalcitrant to do, and also on a broad-based tax. Your thoughts on this contingency language, which quite honestly is unheard of in these kind of things, where it's the specificity of it is so unique, and the fact that they're actually tying a legal a statute to whether or not something else gets enacted seems it's first of all, it seems arrogant. Second of all, it just seems like it's destined to fail.
Well, I'm not a huge fan of the House fiscal plan either. It spends too much. It relies too much on PFD cuts. It has an income tax in it that I don't think is necessary, and neither are the PFD cuts if they get spending down to sustainable levels. So I'm not a huge fan of the House fiscal plan. But let me say this: that is a reaction to what the Senate's done. the Senate, and we're going to get into this in the next segment when we talk about Natasha Von Imhof's piece, but the Senate has, to me, sort of done the worst of all worlds. The Senate has tried to rely for new revenue entirely on PFD cuts. The worst thing you can do to the overall Alaska economy, the worst new revenue option from the standpoint of new revenue options, it reduces overall Alaska income the most. It cuts jobs, reduces jobs the most, increases poverty, and increases income disparity. Absolutely abysmal policy on the Senate's part. And the House is really reacting to that. The House is saying, look, we're not going to do this entirely on the backs of PFD cuts. We need to have other skin in the game here. Income tax and the oil industry needs to come to the table as well. And so I don't like the House fiscal plan. I think it's bad for the reasons I articulated, but I understand why they're doing it in order to get leverage on what the Senate has done, which frankly, in its own way, is a bad fiscal policy.
Right.
So I'm not that upset by the House tying it together in that way. There usually is there often is contingency language in various bills that pass through the legislature. This is a little bit different, but it's not hugely different. And frankly, I think it's just part of the end game that we see setting up between the two bodies.
And of course, that is, you and I have talked about that. I mean, the end game being that this is going to be a monumental struggle, tug of war back and forth. We are already expecting it to go beyond the 90 days and again, already pontificating that it will go beyond the 120 days constitutional limit, which means we'll be into extra innings. Best case scenario, as far as everything that's currently on the table, would be we have a budget. It's been approved. Nothing happens as far as the funding mechanism side of things, and so it automatically gets funded out of our savings, and we get a chance to recycle these people back out into the world, out of the bubble of Juneau, and get them a chance to interact with some of their constituents who hopefully beat the hell out of them over the fact that they wanted to tax them both in the PFD and in the income tax cuts.
Yeah, I think that's right. They are going to have to come up with a budget by the end game, a budget for fiscal year 2018.
Right.
And I don't think there's any question that budget's going to have a PFD cut in it. Both bodies are agreeing in cutting the PFD. I think that's bad, but both bodies are agreeing in it. What's really, I think, important is not to come out of this session with a long-term, locked-in fiscal plan that now makes permanent PFD cuts going forward. I think you're exactly right. Legislators need to get back out in the real world. Clem Tillion, I love the guy from Homer, former Senate president, was there with Jay Hammond during the creation of the permanent fund and the permanent fund dividend. Tillion said, he thinks there's going to be a strong reaction of Alaskans to these permanent fund cuts the more they understand what's going on. And I agree with him on that. And I think getting legislators back home where they have to face constituents and talk about, what they've been doing these last 2 years, leading to PFD cuts, what that's doing to the overall Alaska economy, making the recession worse, resulting in lower incomes, resulting in lower jobs. Making them go home and talk about that, I think, is exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I think that they will probably get some kind of education outside the bubble. We'll have to see how that works. Brad, hold on 1 second. We'll be back with more. The Michael Duke Show continues right here.
Coming up next on The Michael Duke Show.
We're going to continue with Brad Keithley. We're going to talk with him specifically about an opinion piece that came out in the ADN this last weekend from Senator Natasha Von Imhof, who makes some very interesting commentary on why we need to do what she says we need to do. It's some interesting stuff. We'll get Brad's thoughts on that up next right here on The Michael Duke Show. Your home for Common Sense Radio.
This definitely isn't your father's talk radio. That's somewhere down the dial.
Mm-hmm.
This is today's talk radio, The Michael Duke Show.
The Michael Duke Show. Your home for Common Sense Radio. Thanks for coming in and joining us. Brad Keithley comes in every week to discuss oil and gas, politics, but most predominantly in the last year or so, the budget, because we're in a condition right now where we could be making decisions that could affect Alaska for, well, a generation or more. I don't think I'm overstating that. We'll see what Brad Keithley has to say about that. Good morning, sir. Thanks for coming back.
Michael, thanks for having me back.
Is that an overstatement, do you think? I mean, the decisions we're making now definitely affecting us for a generation. I mean, that's kind of how I see it at this point.
Well, certainly if we adopt either the Senate's fiscal plan or the House's fiscal plan, these long-term fiscal plans that cut the PFD and don't get spending under control, yes, we are absolutely affecting the next generation of Alaskans in a very bad way. We need to find another alternative that both treats the current generation and the future generation of Alaskans much better than what either of those proposals do.
I'm just concerned, and I'm concerned about the lack of foresight in what it appears to be going on with our legislature right now. But unfortunately, this is just a continuing track record of what we've seen, quite honestly, over the last 40 years in the state. Just a severe lack of foresight in long-term planning and thinking. It just seems like they can't think much beyond 2, maybe 3 years down the road. They can't look at this from a 10-year perspective.
Yeah, it's really gotten bad since 2010. I mean, 2010 was when things really started to go off the rails in terms of increased spending. We had, due to ACEs, due to a wrong tax policy, we had a lot of revenue, and rather than take the long-term view and try to figure out what the sustainable spending level was inside of our long-term revenue, they just started spending money. It was like, kids with cash in their pocket and burning a hole in their pocket,
right?
And just started spending it on all sorts of things. And so they ran to that side of the ship when we had high oil revenues, spending too much, doing foolish things, adopting programs, building a university system that we can't support. And now, when we're in the low part of the oil cycle, oil prices go up, oil prices go down, oil prices go back up. When we're in the low part of the oil cycle, they're running to the other side of the boat and doing bad things again from the standpoint of things like, we got to cut the PFD permanently, we got to have income taxes, we've got to do all these sorts of things, and about to make a bunch of wrong decisions go in the other direction. So we need people who will sort of sit in the middle of the boat, keep it steady, go through the waves, go through the highs and the lows on a steady course. We haven't found the right combination of leaders or politics or individuals yet to accomplish that. But that doesn't mean we should give up. That doesn't mean we should just say, well, can't do it, and give up on the process. We need to keep working the process to try to achieve that steady course.
Speaking of kind of looking into the mind's eye and the mindset of some of our legislators, they do get a chance to go out there and pontificate a little bit, sometimes in opinion pieces. Senator Natasha Von Imhof had a piece out in the ADN this last weekend where she says a lot of different things. Better a temporary deficit than an income tax, which I think in part we could agree with, but there's lots of other things in there that we probably, you and I would probably disagree with.
Yeah, that piece is sort of the centerpiece defense for what the Senate has done, and trying to justify, rationalize what the Senate's fiscal plan is, and it's just horrible. I mean, it exposed to me as I was reading through it and writing notes to the side, it exposes all of the problems and all of the fallacies that underlie the Senate's fiscal plan. In one paragraph, I think it's the third paragraph maybe of the piece, she says, or maybe the second paragraph, she says, the Alaska State Senate recently passed SB 26, a bill that restructures the annual draw from permanent fund earnings, using earnings of the permanent fund to help cover the budget deficits. The single most important action this legislature can take. This is the key of this paragraph, it is exactly in line with the vision of the original trustees of the permanent fund, who wrote the earnings from the permanent fund can and should help level the peaks and valleys of the Alaska traditional boom and bust economic cycles, as long as Alaska has sane and reasonable levels of government. Well, that sort of overlooks Hammond's vision and the vision of those who founded the permanent fund and the permanent fund dividend of dividing those earnings 50% to government and 50% to Alaska citizens for use to help support the Alaska private sector and spending in the private sector. It essentially tries to leave the impression that, hey, the entire earnings from the permanent fund were to be helped used to fund government within sane and reasonable levels. Well, it's just not true. I mean, that statement's just not true. It is, the vision was 50% to government when government needed it for essential government services, as Hammond wrote, the other 50% to help support the Alaska private sector by going into the hands of individuals, Alaska citizens and individuals to spend that money in the private sector. That system has worked. We have a better private sector than we would otherwise. We have stronger individuals. We have less poverty. We have less income disparity than we would otherwise. We have more income in the state. We have more jobs in the state as a result of that policy. And that the 50-50 plan has worked. Von Imhof's piece tries to make it out that, okay, now that we've hit this low price cycle, we deserve to, and it was always the vision to take all that money out and give it over to government. It's not true. So that paragraph got me going. The next paragraph says, SB 26 reduces permanent fund dividend amounts to $1,000 per Alaskan, which is just short of the 30-year average, and applies the remaining earnings towards reducing our substantial budget deficit is a solution that closes the gap substantially. Well, the first clause of the first sentence, SB 26 reduces permanent fund dividend amounts to $1,000 per Alaskan, which is just short of the 30-year average. That's just wrong. Two things. One, the 30-year average is 50% of the earnings go to individuals. They go to the Alaska private sector. $1,000 isn't only just short; it's a heck of a way short. I mean, the permanent fund dividend this coming year, if the legislature didn't mess with it, would be about $2,300 per Alaskan. They're going to give Alaskans $1,000. That's not just short. That's more than halfway. That's more than a half cut.
Feel lucky, you plebes, that we'll give you this much. Is kind of that's what I feel like. I mean, they're saying it. Oh, look, well, it's more than what you normally get, so you should be happy with it. But that's not what I'm due.
And it's just wrong. To say that $1,000 is just short of the 30-year average is wrong. It's a wrong statement, factually incorrect, and just absolutely total. Oh, I can't say it on
bunk.
There. But it's just bunk. There we go.
Yeah.
It's just wrong, and I can't imagine how anybody with a straight face tries to articulate that. And then further down in the piece, this sentence got me too. The latest budget presented by the Senate for fiscal year 2018 has a general fund spending cap. General fund spending reduced to about $4.1 billion, which meets the spending cap the Senate placed within SB 26. This spending cap grows by inflation. If adhered to, will stop the wild fluctuations in the operating budget and keep government growth in check. Well, Natasha, it doesn't. I mean, it is not a general fund spending reduced to about $4.1 billion. That's the operating side. You guys haven't come up with a capital budget yet. And the capital budget is going to add to that $4.1 billion. You can't say that you've achieved a $4.1 billion overall budget because you haven't. And your spending cap has the same deficiency. Your spending cap only applies to the operating budget. It doesn't apply to the capital budget. You've left an exception in SB 26 in the spending cap you have in SB 26 for the capital budget. The wild fluctuations that have occurred over the last 7 years in the budget, they haven't been due to the operating budget. True, the operating budget's been growing because the legislature hasn't kept it under control. But the wild expenditures, the wild fluctuations, that was the capital budget.
Right, billions of dollars.
That billions. I mean, we're talking about up to $8 billion in 1 year was the overall unrestricted general fund budget because of the capital budget. And that has been the problem, the growth of the capital budget, not the growth of the operating budget. You guys aren't addressing the core of the problem, the inability of the legislature to hold itself in check when it comes to the capital budget, and you created an exception which allows you to continue not to have that under control. So that paragraph is wrong and isn't giving citizens the facts.
Well, and just to continue this whole theme of tone deafness, she then goes on to talk about later on that if we institute an income tax now, we'll be kicking our economy while it's in recession. And yet they don't treat the fact that taking $1,300 away from every man, woman, and child in the state of Alaska is a huge kick in the recession.
Yeah, that was my next one, Michael. That was my next sentence. The step that hurts the Alaska economy the most, that reduces overall Alaska income the most, that makes the recession worse the most, is the PFD cut. Yes, an income tax is bad, but if you look at the ICER analysis, a PFD cut both reduces overall income, Alaska income, more than an income tax, and it reduces Alaska jobs more than an income tax. If you're really worried about the recession, what you really ought to be worried about is the $700 million in PFD cuts that you've passed as part of SB 26 and as part of your budget. Not the income tax. That's actually the easier part on the economy of the program that you're adopting.
The overall, again, just kind of the tone deafness of the entire legislature over this issue, regardless of whether it's a PFD cut or a PFD cut and an income tax or what, this all has direct impacts on the public economy, on the private economy. And that's the one thing that we've been harping on, is that there has been analysis as to what it does to the public economy. Well, it retains this program. It keeps this program intact. It keeps these employees helping doing their jobs as public servants. Yet it has absolutely no analysis of what happens to the private economy.
Yeah, they don't want it. I mean, I've become convinced that neither the Senate nor the House want to hear about what the impact of their plans are on the overall Alaska economy, on overall Alaska income, on overall Alaska jobs, on poverty levels, and on income disparity. I'm convinced they don't want to hear it. They don't want their constituents to know. They don't want it out there in the public record. They want to just be able to make up these sound bites. And like Senator Von Imhof does in this piece, make up these sound bites, live in their own reality, and try to convince Alaskans that, we know best what we're doing for you. Just accept what we're doing. We're
running out of time here, Brad, but Carrie is on the phone. She has a quick question for you, so let's jump over there real quick. Carrie, you got just a second. Ask Brad your question.
You're preaching to the choir, but I want to know, do you have some place where you have these talking points? How do we educate Natasha Von Imhof and everyone else? I would love to use those talking points, and she's not even my senator. Where can I find those? Can you post them on Michael Duke's Facebook page? Can you put them someplace so that I can sound as articulate as you do, and make sure that all the people who are listening to the show right now that agree are actually doing something about this?
All right, Carrie, Brad, we got about 60 seconds.
Okay, go to Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets on Facebook. Go to bgkeithley.com on the web. You'll find it there. And if Michael will let me, we'll also post it over on the Michael Duke Show Facebook page as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll post it to all the Facebook pages and everything else. We'll put that information out there. Brad will have your talking points out there as well. Brad, final thoughts here, 45 seconds as we wrap things up. Where do we go from here? What are we watching? What should we do?
Keep calling your legislators, keep writing them, and say, don't cut the PFD. That's the worst thing we can do in the midst of a recession. Find other solutions. They will say, well, we can't tax. Well, no, then cut spending. Get it down to sustainable levels, and then rely on our savings to get us through this low point in the oil price cycle. But keep calling, writing your legislators, posting on Facebook, do whatever it takes to get the message out.
All right. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for a Sustainable Budget. We'll put links up on the KB Wire Facebook page, on my Facebook page, and more. Brad, thank you so much.
Michael, thanks for having me.
As always, good discussions. The Michael Duke Show continues.